Well, joining us now on the show is Sister Sheila Flynn, who is a Dominican sister and part of the, let me see if I get this right, Kopanang community in South Africa.
That's good.
Thank you so much for being with us.
It's very good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Maybe if we could start off by talking a little bit about yourself and in your ministry, and then how you ended up in South Africa.
Sure. I was always inspired by the story of Dominic, and so it was a natural consequence to join a Dominican order. I was involved in the anti-apartheid cause in London, and so when I was asked would I be prepared to be missioned to South Africa, I said yes. I had at that point been in Rome and been exposed to art, and felt deep inside me that perhaps art could be a vehicle for good news. So when I came to South Africa, I asked, could I study for art, which I did. And subsequent to that, I was teaching at the University of Johannesburg, coming up one day from Durban on a very lonely long stretch of highway, and pulled in under a bridge where there were two African women in the pouring rain, waiting for a lift, which I offered to them, and they said no, it was not their lift that they wanted. And I realized that they were sex workers on the road, and I said, do you know what risk you are taking? And one of them looked me in the eye and she said, do you know what it's like to be able to have to go through the night with your child crying of hunger? And that was a watershed for me, and that was kind of the direction that I felt that God was calling me, a sacred calling to give women other choices. So out of that, and out of a call from women in a very poor township, I responded to be able to start training and bringing together women at Kopanang, which is a Sotho word meaning bringing together. So the project was born from the needs of the women, and from the response of God's preferential option for the poor.
Talk a little bit more about the community and the work that they do, and what you try to foster in the community.
Okay. The community itself are very, very poor, and the mines that were the labour force in the area have subsequently closed down. So we have 80% unemployment, so you can imagine that the poverty is huge. So for the women to be able to earn money that they can feed their children, that was the purpose of starting the project, but starting as a faith community, very deeply faith-driven community. I started training the women in skills that would produce product that they would be able to sell and feed their children. So they weren't just looking for charity, they were looking for a way of being meaningfully employed to provide for their children. And a place where they could build community together from 12 different cultural groups with as many different languages, coming together, breaking open the word every day, singing whether they're joyful or sad. Their prayer is the centre point of their lives every day, and they're coming together to be support to one another with they live through the most horrific stories. And they produce beautiful work. They never knew how to thread a needle when they started. Neither did I. I was 6 stitches ahead of them, but somehow believed that this was a way forward that wouldn't cost too much. And so the project has gone from strength to strength and blessing to blessing, and provides a livelihood for 64 women on site and 13 women in a sister project, and about 700 dependents, because many of these women are taking care of their sisters or brothers, families that are, or their own children who have died of HIV/AIDS, which has been a significant factor in the poverty and suffering and loss of their lives.
And maybe if you could expand on what life is like. I know a lot of people know about apartheid and,
yes,
and what happened years ago, but what's the situation now? It seems like a lot of people are still struggling.
Yes, and the poor will always struggle that much more because resources are not readily available for them. Antiretrovirals are readily available at clinics, but they have to get to the clinics. There's still a stigma around HIV/AIDS, and which is why it's so important to build community together and build faith together to sustain one in the difficult times. The poverty expresses itself by about 12 of our families are on the edge of malnutrition, and so and have too many children to feed before they can finish products enough to feed their children. So we have a school in Australia that supports a feeding program for them. And for instance, one of our mothers, Big Mama is her name, Mary Mbanani, I took her a basic food supply round and said to her, Mary, when did your family last eat? She takes care of 23. And she said, I knew God would bless us. I knew that my prayers would be answered. It's 21 days since we had a full meal, and today God has blessed us. So they are my teachers. They have taught me what courage is, what faith is, what trusting in God is. Another one of our mothers, one of our elders, came in one day. She'd been very sick, and she said, you all know I've been sick and I must preach to you today. And she opened the scriptures and she started reading, the Lord is my shepherd. She said, you all know I have been sick, but none of you know the darkness of spirit that has brought me to the edge of despair. She said, but God has said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And she said, God is a keeper of promises. So again, you know, this sense of deep faith that God is with them in their suffering. And when we were renovating an old farmhouse, which is where our project resides, I said to one of our first volunteers, we'd got the roof on, will we ever get the windows fixed? And she said, Sister Sheila, you must have more faith. If God has this dream for our children, this will come true. So, as I say, they're my teachers, and it's a privilege to be with them.
We're running out of time, but I just wanted to touch on some of the products that they make. If you could just describe a couple of them.
Sure. Perhaps a cushion, some of our bread and butter work.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to thread a needle, so they enjoy creating designs, and we look at different cultures. This is from the Irish culture. There is let me just explain one, if I can get hold of it, if I brought the right one. Yes, they bring African folklore into their work. So this is a Sanufu bird, and it's always pictured looking backwards in order it takes its wisdom from the past before going on a new journey. So they share their different cultures. So we're 21 different church affiliations, so it's very important that we have a forum where they can really, what they believe in is sacred. Yeah.
So where can people find out more about the community and about the products?
We have a website, www.kopanang.org, and we have a Facebook. If you go into the webpage, you can look at all our beautiful products here and read all of our stories, link with a documentary, 16-minute documentary on the project, which will tell you lots about this wonderful place of hope.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sister
You're
Sheila,
welcome.
for being with us today.